always hit the raise your hand button that's on the lower left-hand corner there, or as before, send me a chat message, and we'll pass it along to Randy and get your question answered. So I think without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Randy.
Well, thank you, Chris, and it was delightful to hear a few voices so that as I look at a screen, I don't think I'm talking to myself. And that would be a short conversation, but glad you're here. This topic is near and dear to my heart, I think critically important, and hopefully we have some fun going through it as a big overview. Actually, this cartoon is representative uniquely of a family that I was just with yesterday, who each year sign over their shareholder rights to the leader, and there's now some dissension that way, and it was unique that we just had this conversation. So I hope you don't go through this, and if you just look at the technical planning side, I think you may at some point have some of those challenges. The other cartoon, and these are thanks to a friend, Leon Danko, but Sunday, son, this will all be yours, assuming I can get my father to give it to me first. A couple of key points of wisdom there, and we'll go over some of that. One of the reasons that just never ceases to amaze me is the impact that closely held businesses, private businesses, small business, whatever term you want to use, have that I too often think isn't even recognized. Now, some of that is reflected in a number of statistics. Maybe some of you have read them before. 78% of all new jobs are from small businesses. The employment numbers that they have. Actually, at the recent annual conference, there were some amazing statistics, I thought, that John Logue had presented related to even specifically employee-owned businesses in Ohio. And some of his comments, which aren't written down here as statistics, but in Ohio, manufacturing was down 29% across the state from January 2000 to February 2008. But by his account of his research of those employee-owned businesses and his sample that have been associated with the center there, that employment was down 1%. Pretty impactful to a state, and might that have had a much greater impact across the state if more businesses were that way. Very, very possible. And overall employment in Ohio, of course, many of those manufacturing jobs are taken up in the service industry. But again, his statistics, overall employment in Ohio was down 3%. That's not his. That's a published number. But of those companies that he had researched on the employee-owned side, they were up 15%. That, to me, is invaluable to communities related to any kind of family business, particularly since there's so many that make up our country. Nearly 40% of those family businesses' key issue will pass to that next generation in 5 years. And that typical family firm, do they have an impact to communities? $50,000 per year is not something to sneeze at to educational and religious organizations. And most wealth is made up, much of that going to grow, but also made up of those family businesses. 70% of that wealth, the challenge we have passing to that next generation, this is wealth, much of it comprised of those small businesses, will be lost at the end of that generation, and 87% by the end of the third. I haven't met too many people that have accumulated or built, particularly off the sweat of their brow, that find this a particularly enjoyable statistic to think about. And you've probably heard this statistic many times, but approximately 67% of businesses fail in that first generation, and greater than 90% by that second generation. Now, to me, those are startling because there's a huge impact, I think, certainly from employment that we talked about already, but also from an influence on communities that businesses have. Oftentimes when these happen, that leaves communities, values to their family and employees that are just structured in work ethic and those things that they support. When these businesses are no longer active or gone, I've experienced that those influence and values leave. So it impacts much beyond the family. Os Guinness, you probably recognize that family name. He's been through this a bit, also a great thinker. But this quote by Os Guinness, "Our children have too much to live with and not enough to live for," found compelling. And much of the time that I've seen spent in this topic of family business succession is related to the tactical or technical sides, the transactional side. It's important, and you've heard some great conversation on that in some earlier webinars in this series on some of those technical tools and how do you structure and how do you transfer. And that's a great job. But if you're just focusing on how to live with more, the greater challenge comes in sharing your vision of what to live for. I think that's a side that is too often neglected, both individually by owners, but also by the broader community talking to them. Why is this key? At least that I've found out in a couple of little examples. As I've worked with folks, business owners for 20 plus years now, it seems there's a big lack of understanding in what this financial devastation, everybody knows that taxes may impact businesses, wealth, or the loss of wealth may impact families, but oftentimes they don't sit down to really count what that cost can be. You've heard some strategies on how to correct some of this, but in just a few little examples, the impact that this has, not just in a case like this to a family, you know, and what can be possible that way, but also related to those things that you benefit, that you control dollars to. And if those things get a little larger, they have even greater impact financially. The amazing thing to me is both of these were business owners that had done a lot of technical planning. About every tool in the tool belt they had used. And still there's a much greater ground, I found, related to the relational issues, the family dynamics that we're talking about today that hindered some of that moving forward. What does this look like in a business cycle format? I kind of draw it out in a chart this way. Most businesses seem to start, or many of them, first generation. And I don't know if those on the call today are in that first, second, or third, but at some level you're moving yourself to that first generation. But the first generation, oftentimes many that we've dealt with, started in the early 30s. Oftentimes because they had to. They became jobless, became broke, they were scared, they needed to care for a family, and felt, you know, I've got this idea, I'm tired of getting bumped around, we'll start this thing. Sometimes they came from public corporations, many more today, by the way, particularly with even some greater flexibility earlier in this 2,000 years when Silicon Valley took off and many tech companies. So a lot of people left public corporations and are starting these things now. And some people certainly have inherited those businesses. But oftentimes you're the one working and have limited sight or time with your family, and you're following a dream that you're unable to articulate oftentimes to that family. And so your spouse, be that your wife or be that the husband, whoever's starting this business, has a great deal of insecurity. In fact, they're scared and you're taking the last dollar to make this thing move forward, struggling to stay alive while learning to run a business and implementing your idea. And a lot of the mistakes, certainly everybody's going to have those, but in judgment and interpersonal relationships with your family, sometimes are overemphasized to categorize oftentimes that owner into a tough-minded individual, stubborn, ruthless, when in actuality you have to do those things to survive, creating lower rates or shaving your profit to get some business. And your question becomes, was this a good idea or how did I get in this? While your spouse's question becomes, why don't you quit and get a steady job? That seems like that would work a lot easier. But it's interesting, usually when I'm getting to hear those stories, those are considered the good old days. And oftentimes, in reality, it's those good old days that create the foundation of the problem for this issue of business succession, particularly related to family dynamics. It's in this time that you're operating out of a basement. One of our clients, that's exactly where they started, actually many, until the kids are being kept up at night. Then they're asked to move by their wife to the garage, until the neighbors are being kept up at night, trying to avoid the zoning commissioner, and then asked to move that into another little building. Mom is not a part of that, or dad, depending who started that deal. but they may be helping keep some books, understanding we do have some people that owe us money, and we better keep track of that. And usually the kids, oftentimes, if they get old enough to lick a stamp or put something in place, they then become employees. It's critical at that point. You just need help, people to pitch in, whether they're oftentimes relatives, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, and keep that profit in the family. Some of those family members actually have a few extra dollars perhaps, and that's your source of capital. And that, again, are now your future shareholders. Their focus is to remain and run the business, and usually you get your first introduction to your university education, which I would call the Internal Revenue Service, because they want to collect some taxes, and they're hoping you're accounting for those profits and paying those. You are the employee and the husband or wife of the household trying to get this thing going. Surviving that stage, which many businesses don't, presumptive that you have on this call today, but those stages laid the basis of a lot of family dynamics. Next stage, now the business is starting to grow a little bit. You're actually making a few sales and actually getting to keep a little bit of profit so that your spouse's fears lessen a little bit. They actually are meeting the bills, not juggling them all the time with a little extra dollar to pay for. Still a stranger to the family, and the hardest worker in the company is you. But now that's alleviated, at least at home, with a few dollars. Interesting. Most of those business crises, labor issues or bidding issues or vendor issues, still reside with you, and your spouse is out of that. And those are usually the stories that oftentimes get taken home of those challenges. What does that mean from the perception of your kids that are hearing all those challenges? It may be, why would I ever want to be in this deal? At the same time, you're telling them potentially that someday this may all be yours. That may be a potential area of conflict there. One of the things that also becomes very interesting dynamic is this issue of not disclosing everything, keeping some secrets, letting some people know some information, other people know other, because there's a lot of still uncertainty. I find that oftentimes, even in the family dynamic, you don't want everybody to know everything. They may start say, boy, things are going so well, I should get more. Either your kids, your brothers, your aunts, uncles. Your friends now, if they knew too much about what the business was doing, may hit you up for more jobs for their kids, maybe even dollars. Your employees, if they knew that you were doing well, but if a few things don't come through, we could go the other way, they might be scared enough to leave and find employment otherwhere. Your advisors, if they think you're doing better, they might choose to raise their prices, which is always interesting. And you've now been able to move. You probably have a banking relationship versus the loan shark, and probably able to move in that direction. But if they knew, again, that you were teetering on grand success or potential failure, they may be a little more strict on their credit terms or even decide not to do that note. At this level, help becomes a little more open, it seems, where you move into acquiring some of those advisors, accounting, legal, and you may now have a banker. The challenge, it seems, not an uncommon factor, is that these advisors usually, because you're still the hardest working person in that growth cycle, you don't have a lot of time. So the advisors become the most available people to you, not necessarily the best people, which may or may not be good. What happens next, that next phase of HERO? Well, there the business is now doing very well. It's growth. You're well beyond wondering if you're going to eat your next meal. And the family is receiving some of that benefit as well. And so your spouse, be that mom, be that dad, the payoff in now you have influence. People are aware of that. You got a little more finances, you have some affluence, and some power. And you've learned from the Internal Revenue University, oftentimes, which is always amazing, but the family business, it's not in the business to make a profit, but to break even at a higher and higher level. And I'm sure you've practiced that deal. That doesn't help a lot of the stockholders feel like they have liquidity, be they your kids for some transitions or other family members. And your organizational structure is still usually focused around you, be that with you at the top and everybody else at the bottom, or you in the middle and everybody else reporting to you. With this issue of still guarding information being a challenge. At this point, and I can't go into them today, but there's usually 5 areas of statements that I hear that we talk about a lot. In fact, I would call them myths. I think others may have as well. I'll address them briefly for the sake, if you're that first generation, be cautious if you hear yourself saying this. Step back for a moment. If you're that second or third generation, know that it's not uncommon. But those myths, at least that I hear, usually come in the form of phrases, one being, my business is different. Therefore, you can fill in the blank. Secondly, when you've had my experience, you'll understand. Third, it's my money. I'll do with it what I want. There's some big challenges to that. Fourth, business is lousy. I usually am on somebody's boat when we're talking about that. 5, it's my business and I'll do with it what I want. Challenging myths, if you're hearing or saying those, I would certainly caution you. But it's a good time financially and a tough time to think ahead oftentimes. That 4th phase on that chart, which is called history, oftentimes by then some of that has been enjoyed and worn off, and now there's a more contemplative approach. Also, a greater or less of a level to take risk at this level, which creates some dynamic issues, particularly when you have a second generation or a management team that has some ideas for change or new ventures or new directions to go. There's less of an openness to that. And oftentimes in a family, at least at this level, the spouse, we'll call that mom in this example, is really in a challenging spot a lot of times. One, because of this communication issues of keeping some of that information, but also she's seen the person that is a driven and a self-motivator that has built this business with great energy. Now with between a son or a daughter that want to make their changes or management team. And how does she help balance both of those on those end of things? Those become big challenges. Dad, in that example, doesn't want to quit. It's going to keep going and does have benefit to give. Mom thinks Dad's going to die at work, which is not what she wants to happen, and continue to benefit life with him. And the family feels nothing's going to change until Dad dies, and then we may have a chance. And unfortunately, even as the statistics related earlier, that's when many businesses will die with those owners. Along with that, I think value influence that impact communities. There's a huge fear. I would categorize them as change at times. Things become comfortable to where it got you to that point. Certainly there's a fear that time is catching up. And then there's a big fear oftentimes of the stability of the business in an ongoing fashion. And I'm sure you've heard the comments, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. That's how it gets there. The choices, to me, that seem to be to carry that thing to the ground relates in liquidation. Letting it move smoothly oftentimes results in maybe a sale or a merger, maybe able to run a little more smoothly, which views to leisure, and certainly the course that says, boy, I'm going to take a leadership role in this thing and help that next group change the future to keep it going, not make the mistakes I made earlier. And my recommendation would lead to legacy in that vein. Any of those can be a choice. I guess our hope today is that you understand you are making one of those and moving towards one of those goals. interesting quote from Leon Danko: most destroy on the way down what they built on the way up, which is adverse to the information that I usually hear, what they're trying to or want to accomplish. Should the kids be in the business? Always an interesting question. And I've heard probably as many different answers to that. From the family perspective, it's not uncommon if Dad has started that business that he wants those kids to be a part of it in some way. Now, I would say that I've talked to many owners, dads in this example, and they've said there's no way I want my kids in this business. Business is lousy, one of those myths that I've told you before. Oftentimes I find that statement because they don't think the kids will be in the business or have an interest in it. And it's been amazing that 2 to 3 years after that conversation, they certainly, from a legacy standpoint, have enjoyed or encouraged or wanted their kids there. And now that there's some spark or interest, it's amazing how they changed that statement from a strong conviction to love to have them try. Mom, on the other hand, having experienced that business and growth through the areas we just went through, has seen all the challenges, hasn't been a part of all the dream end of those things, and says, why would I ever want my kids to be involved in that? Oftentimes. Why would I want them to have interaction, the experiences in their family that we had to move through? We're delighted to where we're at today, but I don't want my kids having to go through that to get there. So even in making decisions between spouses related to what to do and how we do it, again, transactions can be structured on where you move stock and where you don't. But coming to some common terms between spouses, if that can't be done, it limits the ability of technical and tactical structures to be effective. What might the kids' perspective in this be? It can run the gamut. Very interesting. One, certainly on the upswing, after they've licked those stamps and applied some envelopes, later years, they've had a lot of benefit from the success of that business, including times when they may go to the office on a Saturday or to the shop with Mom or Dad and get to run around and play on computers or find the food in the kitchen that's available. The other side, they also hear nothing but the troubles related to that business, which may taint their view. When that view is different, by the way, it's amazing. I never forget a conversation with a very successful business owner. And one of the things he said impacted him to run this machine shop in the Cleveland area was his dad. His dad was a machinist, and he would talk about dinner every night. His machinist that later came to own his own little company, and it was little at the time. He said Dad would come home every night and talk about Jake and Melvin and all those and how skilled they were at what they did with those machines. He said they became my heroes, and that's all I ever wanted to do. And he did. He took his dad's business and grew it many times, many times, and is working on moving that to the next generation. But if, on the other hand, more conversations are about nothing but trouble, that's the only view that comes out of that, and there's no good in that. Those are easier conversations. Environmental regulations are issues to talk about, labor, and governmental regulations, and what the competition are doing, and how that relates to the economy seem to be much more prevalent in conversations. Also, the family identity in the community. The kids may be known as, their dad owns this business or their mom owns this business. It creates their identity, which could be a very good thing. It could be a thing that is challenging to them. And they may want to get closer to or further away from with lack of further understanding. There may be a respect issue that from a family standpoint, 3 kids and 1 or 2 are in the business, 1 is not. Does that mean they don't have as much value to the family because they're not associated with that entity? Haven't met many parents that would feel that way in speaking with them. But from a perspective of children, that perception can certainly be there from actions that occur. And their ultimate answer may be, is it worth it to continue in this building projects or succession? Same thing can be said for management teams, not just families.
Randy?
Yes.
I think at this point I'd like to see if there's any questions out there. It seemed like a decent time to take a quick, short break. At this point, I'm going to open up all the phone lines, and if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to ask them.
The conference has been unmuted.
I can hear for them. Okay, the phone lines are open, which means we can hear what you're saying. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, that's fine. I know sometimes it's with the webinar format, you prefer to do it via the chat or the raise your hand function.
Can people hear me? I appreciate that question. I want to make sure I tried to make that closer.
Is everyone hearing okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Great. I think at this point we'll close the phone lines back up. And Randy, if you want to move forward, we'll keep on going.
Will do. What I found in many related to these dynamics as well, and again goes back to at least what I've observed in the schematic, but an owner's identity, and we talked about this earlier, they're immortal, they're going to live forever, so all these issues can be resolved. They won't have to really choose between liquidation or leisure or legacy because they're going to be around to fix that. And that business becomes so close and such an identity that it gives great feedback that is a place that draws much attention, almost as a mistress, and that may be a bad example, but related to their family and this business, they're very strong pulls in both ways. The business allows productivity, get feedback, get control, and it's a good place to use skills that they have. Some of the family issues in their view, from the owner's perspective, they may tie values to those engaged with the business. They don't understand, the kids don't understand the perspective of this business. It's not uncommon for their kids to have very different choices, oftentimes even politically or economically, in choices they make, either in encouraging or revolting against some of those ideas that they would think their parents have had in starting that business. And one of the issues that at least I think is something to give consideration to is how you're positioning your family. Particularly, most people would like them engaged at some level in most conversations. But when you position those children at a younger age that they get the run of the place and there's no rules, as an example, and the employees are there to kind of take care of them while a few things get done, that is an impression that oftentimes comes back years later. It's amazing how those conversations and perception I've seen time and time again that are impacted by that. So how you're treating and what happens there, just caution that idea. What does that mean? I guess one of the biggest things I think you should choose to understand the choices and control them that I think you have related to this succession issue, and particularly related to the family dynamics of that. You get a couple partners, and those partners that you get in that business you can't avoid, and most people don't acknowledge. I would suggest their age and time that have an impact, as well as this partner called Uncle Sam. And he loves for you to be confused on that topic for his benefit, quite frankly. Next, I'd like to talk about 10 action steps related to this. I did get a question that popped up here, so at least I want to read it and address that. The question is related to folks recommending that children get a job outside the business, maybe a promotion or two, and then bring them back into the business. I think that setting up a structure, asking for my comment to that, I think setting up a structure related to how you're going to treat your kids is wise to do up front. And I do think there's some benefit to them having some outside exposure. A lot of ways that can happen. A lot of times they get inside exposure with summer jobs, summer internships, and certainly, as we've talked, what you bring home from school. But I do think there's some benefit in having them get influence outside. Some have chosen, and I've seen it done very effectively, by the way, to put their kids come in the company with some skills that are very beneficial, and they keep them in an isolated fashion, either physically and certainly by reporting basis to other people, and they stay out of it. I would tell you that's extremely hard for most parents to do, because you still have conversations around Thanksgiving or Christmas, and to be able to not address those issues at those times are very challenging. But I do think there's benefit to doing that. I think the biggest benefit is to, ahead of time, setting up what the policy is. And particularly if you have multiple children, because that next generation are now going to have more iterations. And what is the policy for being employed at this company? And this is our family employment policy, so that it's documented. We've done that with a number of companies. It's there for all family members, and you don't have to make tough calls sometimes. These 3 kids were great, these 2 aren't, and you get viewed as objectively deciding you don't like this one or you don't like that one because of who's in it. But thanks for that question. What are these 10 action steps? Try to fly through these a little quickly. One, I think to do that, it's not just the tactical or technical implications. Those are critical, and you've heard about some of those steps. But what I've observed is they may be more harmful to the family and the business if you don't follow some of these steps. And what I mean by that, I've had more than one occasion where businesses have transferred some of their ownership, stock or partnership units, obviously generally the non-controlling versus the controlling, to family members. And one point to outside family members for a minority share. And they've engaged and said, you know, I would have rather, and they've done phenomenal transactions moving large value with no taxes. And now they're saying, I wish it would I'd rather pay all the tax, and all that would be annulled, because now my kids don't talk to each other, they don't communicate, and they're not exercising values that we think they should exercise. I would rather pay the tax and had some of those other issues in our family not affected. These are the reasons I think you need to address these steps to better prepare for the tactical and technical. One is transferring that history, telling the story, writing your thoughts, recording your history, the values, the issues, the strengths, the weaknesses that you went through in this business, and even your insight, what they should avoid doing in the future. Preparing heirs. For me, that first generation has 4 values, the second generation as well. But you generally started from nothing, as you heard, had to be creative in just surviving. They engaged the family, members, kids, aunts, uncles, to the community to survive. And they all shared a core value of hard work, or generally around an ethnic group or a faith group that said we're going to pitch in and do this together, and sharing the same core values of what it meant as a final product. And they had little to no capital to start that business, financial structure. The second generation has generally benefited tremendously from capital, but oftentimes at the cost of helping develop their creativity, their connection to community, and what are those core values that help us to know what to live for versus just what to live with. I would encourage you, and it's not uncommon that you don't want your family to go through the same trials and hardships you did, so you help them with education, great. You help them with a lot of things. But I would encourage you to think about how you help them with their creativity, in the business or out, connecting to community, not just at Thanksgiving and Christmas as a demand, and generating what are those core values. They usually have some comfort with capital, and I would suggest developing those 3 areas. They're going to even be more responsible with that capital, so that you capture that wealth and you change those statistics of wealth that is lost in next generations. I think you need some independent, outside, objective advice to help think through, even with some of those existing folks that you deal with, where is information not been shared that would be more beneficial to a much larger picture? Giving a comprehensive approach to not only the tactical and structural from a financial attack standpoint, but also from a family dynamic standpoint. And I talked to you a little bit about one of those situations already. I think it's very helpful to have a board of counsel, whether you want to call it, make it official, whether you want to pay people or invite them, some in the business but often out. And the challenge there is it's probably somebody that you're not connected with, or at least to some degree, not connected with currently. So a board of counsel, you get counsel from your advisors, I'm sure, already. There's probably others in your industry, or at least that are just good business folks that you can talk with that can help with that and think through some of those issues and be a sounding board for you. What are your goals? Huge issue to start from. Why are you doing what you're doing, and why are you trying to transfer this versus how? Is there a difference between how you would set up for exit versus a succession strategy? The answer is yes, there is. I can't hear your response. Estate planning versus succession planning, are they different? Do they have different components? Do they deal in different areas? They're certainly complementary, but they are different. And how do you assess where you're at or what you're at? One of the things we like to go through is a thing we call a business protection plan, which is really you writing down and documenting a number of items that those stepping in, be that your family or your management team, would be able to pick up on in a much more efficient fashion. Where are your people, your locations, what are the strengths? What are the strengths, the SWOT analysis? What are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats you see in the business, and discussing that with others? Do you have the right people on the bus, as Jim Collins would say? Certainly those are assessment type of vehicles, but oftentimes held largely in the head of one person, and component pieces are held in the minds of several different people. It's wonderful to have them in a place that everybody could know where that might be. Coordinating your family goals with the business goals is just huge. A couple of questions you might ask: is fair always equal, or is equal always fair? Recently a family with 3 kids, 2 in the business and 1 in-law in the business of that. And the idea, like many, is we have to transfer this equally. We'll do this to our kids equally and let them all run the business. The challenge was, as you speak with the family, they said this will never work. If there's a decision that comes up in this business that would sink the business, but my brother feels one way and I feel another, I would protect the relationship of my brother over what is in the best interest of the business. That's not a good way to succeed the business. And as Mom and Dad heard this or get the feedback, they have to then rethink, one, are we creating a conflict in our family that may not let them hug each other at the end with a good tax or tactical tool that is a default answer? Is there a better way to structure this so that it can be treated equally, at least economically, but engage the business at a different level? I would suggest there is. In that situation, there very much was a way to resolve that actually came together both by the cooperation of the kids and the family, which leads into the next comments here on communication. What are your overall objectives, both for the family related to unity and vision and values, as well as the business? And oftentimes that business is the goose laying the golden egg that allows a lot of things to happen, and yet it's given the least attention towards the ultimate planning end. What's your intended plan? And you've got to allow for some feedback. So to keep that plan to yourself and not discuss it with your family, and in this case, the case I just mentioned to you, that was not discussed. It had been in place for 10 years. That's succession strategy, I'll call it. And the children never knew anything about it, nor did the management team. And it was in bringing that to the table that did cause some interesting conversations initially, conflicted conversations, but ultimately resolved at least a resolution that for certain will keep the family talking to each other, which if those conflicts had to be resolved when mom or dad were not there anymore, would have been very challenging tasks to be done. Oftentimes would have led to the liquidation of the business. It may not even been what would anybody wanted to happen. So expressing your ideas, stating that, and allowing some feedback, it may be uncomfortable, but it's very valuable. Your opinion is very much counted on, as much as you may not think so sometimes, and respected. And a lot of these issues will never occur till mom or dad are out of the picture, at which point them being the glue is no longer there. Retaining trust, when you do communicate and you do set out some things, the largest issue is retaining trust. Will you revert back to whatever your old ways were, or whatever you just said will allow it to happen? I think one of the big issues related to this is you are created for some purpose, and building that business and working, you've been employing those talents and giftedness. I don't think either you can liquidate the business and sell out, which many clients have done, without establishing your next steps to being productive. Impact of retirement, I've not found anybody that can solely enjoy the benefits of what they've done, what they've accomplished, and gain maximum fulfillment out of their next steps. They have too many talents, too much energy, they're entrepreneurial. Anybody we deal with, we address this up front. Many balk at us. In fact, some yell at us and say, no way, I put in my time, I'm going to work, I'm going to enjoy it all. I'm going to encourage you, you've got to think about what's going to happen next. You can't just go to the couch and do nothing. A gentleman sold his business, his 3 kids were glad about that. They came to that decision. And his answer, I said, what are you going to do next? Just laying the seeds. His answer was, we're going to travel for about a year. He enjoyed golf. He was going to play much more golf. And I said, that's fantastic. You should do it and you should enjoy it. But you're going to have to think about how you're going to continue to employ. You have too much creativity, too many skills. He got mad at me and said, no way, I left all that behind with the business. I said, just think about it. It wasn't, I think it was about 10 months later when we talked. He was having major challenges. They had been to only so many, already been around the world, plus. He'd done a lot of those other things which were delightful, but now he was going stir crazy. And my experience has been, I can give you statistics and research that informally we've done, but if you don't do this, this impacts not only you, but the relationships with spouses and the relationships with kids, and generally not in a positive way. I can't stress enough how you need to think about this in the transition. And probably the biggest issue is beginning today. I don't know where you're at, what you're thinking about, or those that you might influence are thinking about. But whatever you think you screwed up before, I assure you, I can give you multitudes of stories. It's not too late to make different steps. Sometimes those are relational, related to all the issues that occurred, as I mentioned at the beginning of that business or starting. We're all on this time continuum. I would say starting from today, you can only work on what's going forward. An example that was given to me once is here's a jar of marbles, and every weekend we take out a marble, and I actually have one of these sitting on my desk at home, just to remind that there's only so much time left, that you're not immortal, that these issues can be addressed and can be moved forward upon. I think it's imperative, and the reason that I agreed to do this was to encourage those in this issue. There are dynamics that affect the planning process that have great influence, but you have great influence, and you should control, not give that up to the government. Giving that up does not maximize the benefits that you get or your family gets, a few brief cases I showed you earlier, and it does not benefit communities and things that you support. It doesn't help influence, by the way, either that creativity, the community, or those core virtues that you can establish in your family, which I think just have tremendous impacts well beyond just your family. So I think it's to my benefit to encourage you to do that, and ideologically being driven to those of your communities and those that work for you. So thank you for what you have done. I think we agreed to cut this off about 2 minutes ago, so I apologize for the 2 minutes, but thanks for the time, and I'm glad to interact or entertain questions if you'd have them.
Great, Randy. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. A lot of good stuff in there. And I think you ran 2 minutes late because I started you 2 minutes late. So I take responsibility for that. At this point, I have a quick question. While I'm going to open up the phone lines and see if anyone has any additional questions. But I have a quick question. I was talking to a business owner just the other day about how specific, you said, put stuff down in writing. And I encourage them to do the same thing, to come up with some kind of written plan. And even before you talk to your advisors, think, try to put down your goals, what your objectives are. How specific would you recommend getting on that?
Well, I think, first of all, when you do that, usually we exclude these family dynamic issues.
The conference has been unmuted.
I don't know if you could hear me there, if we were in the midst of a changeover, but I think as I see goals, most people, when they talk to advisors or put down goals, they will list goals related to the expertise or the area that advisor works with. Want to do this tax efficiently, want to do this maintaining some control, want to do this with the income coming back to me. And so on behalf of the advisors, it doesn't give them a broad perspective of what does that mean to your family. And so then you get great transactions, great tax strategies or cash flow strategies and poor family strategies. So to me, I don't think you have to be real specific initially. Quite frankly, that's probably going to change. But to me, you start someplace, and they must involve both personally what you feel are things that are important to you. I've heard that be work ethic. Well, that's going to have an impact on how you're going to draft how people are involved in your business, your family. I've heard people want their goals, they'd love their kids to be more generous or understand more about their culture or history or faith. To me, those are invaluable goals to document in addition to the tangible or tactical, and they don't have to be extremely specific. That's what you're going to try to figure out, how to incorporate all that in.
Okay, great, super. That's kind of where I was thinking. But I wanted to get, I guess, some independent verification of that. I want to let everyone know that the phone lines are open, and I will ask last time, do we have any questions that anyone else would like to ask? Okay, sounds good. I want to thank Randy for doing an excellent presentation. Again, a lot of good stuff. I really encourage people to really focus hard as you're going through your planning process. Really focus hard on these kind of issues. They're probably the most important things that you're going to be dealing with through this process. I put the first slide up again just so everyone could get a sense if they want to talk to Randy further about this topic and anything that he covered. There's his contact information. Free to contact Randy, or you could contact me at the center here as well. I want to thank everyone for coming. Again, this webinar will be put up on our website probably later today or early tomorrow, the recorded version. And I want to encourage everyone to keep an eye out on our website for further webinars. We'll be rolling some new ones out here in the second half of 2008. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and we'll be talking to you soon, hopefully. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. So one of those is...
Thank you. Please stand.